Welcome to Harder Than It Looks, Parking Uncovered, a podcast that illuminates real solutions to common problems within the parking industry. I'm your host, Brian Wolf, CEO of Parker Technology, and in each episode, I'll introduce you to real parking pros that will bring their own tips, tricks, and best practices to manage what we all know is harder than it looks, parking a car.
Hey, good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. I'm thrilled to be hosting Harder Than It Looks for the first time in front of a live audience. So you're making history with me. I appreciate you showing up. Andy, I appreciate you filling in for Romy, and it's great to have you. For those of you who don't know, Andy is the managing director of TrueNorth Capital, and he has worked in a very broad array of strategic advisory and corporate finance positions over the past 25 years. The last 10, he's focused on specifically on parking and mobility. We're going to dig into that a little bit and why he got there. He has a specific fascination or probably investment thesis around smart cities and urban mobility transactions. So I won't steal all of his thunder because that's part of the shtick. If you've listened to any of my podcasts, we like to let people tell their own story. But I'll just finish the bio of Andy by saying he's also the membership chairperson of the New Jersey chapter of Exit Planning Exchange. He's a community of professional advisors who help owners build valuable businesses and assist them in preparing for successful transactions. He's earned a BA from Colby College, an MBA from Columbia University, and wait for this, he holds a Series 7, 24, 63, and 79 securities licenses, and that must have been a lot of studying when you were younger, perhaps.
Almost all of it was younger. The 24 I did, when I was almost 50, and that was by far the hardest.
Yeah.
It's hard. Just remembering trivial facts, and trying to hold them in your brain. It gets harder as you go.
It really does. So welcome to Harder Than It Looks.
Thank you. First off, apologies to everybody. I know I am neither as easy to look at nor as interesting to listen to as Romy, but hopefully we'll make this all work. Looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Again, what I like to do is I like to literally hand the mic. Now I am handing you the mic and ask you to go back as far as you'd like to go. You can go even before Colby College if you'd like. And just take us through each of the steps that your career has taken you through, because invariably what I learn is I actually hear things that I did not know about the person, and then that might be fun to weave into the conversation as we go. So the mic is yours. Take us back. Tell us your story.
Terrific. So I grew up in New Jersey, went to Colby. There's an interesting thing about parking, and there are a lot of geologists in parking. I was actually a geology major undergrad. And a bunch of us sat down and tried to figure out how geologists end up in the parking industry. Well, we realized that geology puts people into extractive industries, mining, oil and gas, so forth, which are all very cyclical. Parking, on the other hand, is completely non-cyclical, the nice thing about it. And so what happens is there's this boom-bust cycle where all the geologists get blown out of the extractive industries. They're looking for something to do, and there's parking offering jobs. And so same thing happened to me. I graduated from college in the middle of the S&L crisis. So went into environmental consulting, spent about 6 years doing that, 5 of those years in Europe, testing soil and groundwater, driving around the continent in a mobile laboratory, and eventually ended up taking over the Southern European operations in Florence and negotiating joint venture agreements with local environmental companies where we would supply the technologists and the kind of patented technology, and they would provide the marketing and the field labor force, that sort of thing. And I found that I enjoyed negotiating those agreements more than I enjoyed the field work.
Yeah.
I got married there to my college girlfriend. Our daughter was born in Italy, and we started to get pressure from the grandparents, time to come home. Decided to go back to school, got my MBA at Columbia, and went into M&A advice. So I started actually spent a year at Ernst & Young, and then into a place called Wasserstein Perella. Bruce Wasserstein, if any of you remember Barbarians at the Gate, was a famous book about the
R.J.
Nabisco merger. That was Bruce Wasserstein. That was the transaction that put Wasserstein Perella on the map. Okay. So I worked there for a couple of years till Bruce sold it to Dresdner Bank in Germany, and the wheels fell off the wagon being part of a commercial bank. Bruce left and he went to Lazard, and one of the senior partners who had been an old Drexel guy, he and I left. Peter Rothschild is his name. He and I left and formed our own investment bank in 2002 or 3 and ran that together until 2017 when I went over to the buy side briefly with Antarctica Capital that owned Icon, and then to TrueNorth, where I've been for the last 6 years now.
Yeah.
7. So it's been an interesting run, but yeah, 25 years in investment banking, the first 15 doing everything from aerospace and defense to remember Russ Berry, the troll dolls?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
They were a client.
Okay. What was the biggest deal you ever did?
The Russ deal was pretty big, but probably the biggest was Nortec, the take private of Nortec.
Yeah.
About 1.8 billion. We sold it. we did a high yield financing at Wasserstein. 2 years later, we did a take private with Kelso. Then we sold Plygem, which is a big part of it. Then we flipped the remainder to Tom Lee in Boston.
Yeah.
2 years later, Tom Lee had over-levered it. We were going into the housing crisis, and they lost control of it in a bankruptcy situation. And we advised Ares on buying the debt and taking control of it.
So you got
The
6
deal that
bites
kept
at the
giving-
apple.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yes, but that was probably the biggest. So I spent a fair amount of time in HVAC and that sort of thing before parking.
Yeah.
But yeah, really from 2014 on, I've been focused on this industry.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. What about parking caused you to focus on it?
So 2014, we were retained by Antarctica to help them finance their acquisition of Icon Parking when Macquarie was selling it.
Yeah.
And at the time, Icon was about 350 locations, and they were all really operating independently. There was no management control system. There was no insight into real-time inventory, staffing, pricing. They were really...
What year was this?
This was 2014.
Okay.
They were-
So it was still pretty early in the credit card cycles and the
There's still a
technology
lot of
cycles.
cash.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So
Yeah, there wasn't a
so-
lot going on technologically. Credit cards was probably the technology at the time, right?
Yeah, that was the big innovation.
Yeah.
Was being able to pay
Yeah. With a
plastic.
credit card.
Into
To get rid of the
this-
silent partners.
Yes. So the Antarctica's thesis was obviously to introduce more technology into the business. ERP system that was more challenging than they had initially expected.
Were they parking guys before they bought Icon?
They were not.
Aha.
Part-
This will be a common theme.
Yes, the part of the issue.
Yep. For sure.
But also there was a lot of entrenched interests, silent partners in the business that didn't necessarily want to see a lot of transparency.
Yeah.
And so they were fighting two battles. And not all that was internal to Icon. A lot of it was the other constituencies.
Sure.
But so it's not as easy as people think to implement technology. But what I saw at the time on the front end was, wow, here is a business collecting $500 million a year in revenue that doesn't have a central ERP system. If this is the state of the art for a business of that size
Yeah.
in New York City, which arguably should be outside of maybe San Francisco, the leader in technology adoption, what must the rest of the industry look like? This is someplace that's ripe for change, and this is where I should be focusing time.
Yeah.
And so very quickly pivoted. My first thought was, who has the most to gain? It's the operators. If you can find an operator who is technologically savvy and you can grow that operator and create some consolidation, they will become more profitable. They'll take over the industry.
Yeah.
So have definitely worked with operators on that thesis. What I quickly came to realize is also that you have a leverage effect by focusing on the technology companies and working with the technology companies to actually implement that. Given the margins on a software platform, there's a lot more opportunity to create value and growth.
Yeah.
And you're starting from a smaller size too.
Yep. And my experience is parking a car is parking a car. And so back to your leverage point, if you find a piece of software that works, there are literally hundreds, maybe thousands of customers. You just have to find them. Is that part of the thesis as well?
I think we can talk a little bit about consolidation as we get
we'll get to
further
that
along,
for sure.
But yeah, I think I think the number of potential customers is actually shrinking.
Yeah.
And as the operators consolidate.
Yep.
But certainly there's a big market. Especially when the number of parking lots, the number of locations isn't changing. And a lot of the software companies are charging by the location, by the transaction, by the space.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, I think there's plenty of greenfield out there still.
Okay. So then let's talk about the moment you had the eureka moment where, as a geology major, and an investment banker, the lights came on with parking. I guess it was you. I guess you already shared that you saw that they were doing $500 million. And
Yeah.
but the moment you learned that parking was a lot more complicated than it looks, because we all have friends that are like, parking, how hard can it possibly be? And then you get into parking and you learn pretty quickly it's really hard. It's complicated.
It's very complicated. Like the parking is about, as you say, 10% parking cars. It's 10% customer service and site management.
Yeah.
It's 80% accounting. You are essentially collecting revenue on behalf of a site owner.
Yeah.
And ensuring that all of that revenue gets into the right pockets. There's a software vendor to pay. There's your commission to pay. There's the credit card processing fee that gets pulled out. And then a certain amount needs to go to the owner of the location. And all of that needs to be quickly and transparently reported. That is the most challenging part, because not every parking I'm preaching to the choir here for sure. Not every parking transaction is equal. You have early birds, then you get into campus stuff, and you've got tenured professors, you've got untenured professors, you've got students, you've got on-campus students, you have commuters, you've got staff, you've got different levels of staff. Like all of these, and in a city, in the same way, in a parking garage, in a simple residential building, you have transients, you have monthly, you have tenants who are diplomats, so they have a different tax structure.
Right.
You go on, and the permutations you have validations, you have stacked validations. You've got all of these different permutations, and all of that needs to be incorporated in a software product and in a reporting module.
Yeah.
So it is a lot more complicated once you drill down than it seems on the surface.
Yeah. So to the layperson, what I typically tell them, I tell them a story about how they can actually be 3 different parkers in less than 8 hours. You go to work, and you got your Prox card, and you scan, and you go in, and then you go to lunch across town, and you pull a ticket because you're parking in a garage. You're now a transient ticker, and then you're a transient parker, and then you go to the basketball game at night, and you're an event parker, and that's one person, 3 different scenarios, and that doesn't even talk about stacked validations and all of that.
And that's assuming you don't live in an apartment building where
you go home to a different place, and so that tends to help them understand that it's a little more complex. Okay, this is a little bit of curveball because the question isn't what I shared with you earlier. So I'm going to throw a bit of a curve. Okay, so you started when cash and credit cards were the thing, and now it's 2025. So give us your thoughts on the current state of technology, because then the next question will have been on the cheat sheet.
Where do we go from here?
What's your perspective on where the technology is?
It's interesting. Right now there is a lot of technology.
Yep.
The thing about parking is that everybody does it, right? It's like everybody drives a car, everybody parks a car. Nobody likes the experience. Nobody wants to pay for parking. And when you're asked to pay for something where you don't feel like you should pay or you don't want to pay, whether it's a good experience or a bad experience, you're starting off on the wrong foot. So everyone who parks feels like there's a problem solved. So any entrepreneur who is out looking for an opportunity is going to come across parking as a problem to solve early on. And everybody I talked to who's started a parking technology company said, how did you get into it? I said, I went to park my car and this went wrong. And I said, I can do that. And so a couple things from that. One, there are a lot of solutions and there are a lot of different ways of skinning the cat, which I think is great, because ultimately the solution that percolates to the surface is going to be the one that satisfies the most demand, satisfies the most people.
The winner.
And that's the nice thing about it. It's a bit Darwinian. The fittest is likely to be the one that survives. The challenge with that has been that because of that means of that seed crystal, a lot of the, call it first wave parking solutions, started with the customer experience. Said, how do we simplify this for the parker? And not really thinking about who was actually buying the software, and that the real problem needed to be solved for the operator, the user of the software.
Yeah.
And so often we see it now, that a lot of technologies in the parking industry have trouble talking to each other because they've thought about the solution they're solving as an island, as a themselves as a single
the center of the universe.
as the center of the universe,
Yeah.
as solving the
Sure.
problem that they saw,
Yeah.
rather than stepping back and looking at the larger picture. So I think that we're now entering, I would say, phase 2 of parking technology software, where some of those ideas are combining. Other folks who have good insight into, who maybe started from a little bit different perspective, actually went and talked to the operators. Acra's a good example, right? They started off as a rent your driveway kind of company around UCLA Stadium.
Yeah.
And then COVID came along and all the events stopped. So they took a step back and they said, all right, what are we going to do now? They went on LinkedIn and they found all of the CEOs of all the major parking companies in the country who had plenty of time on their hands at the time, since they were
Unfortunately.
parking cars, and said, what are your problems? Where are your biggest pain points? And actually interviewed all of the big operators and identified managing reservation platforms, creating a dashboard so they could see all of that in one place and not have to manage different pools of availability for each reservation platform as a problem to be solved.
Yep.
So they came at it with an operator perspective. A good example of
Yeah. I love it.
So I think that's where I'd say we are now, is that we are in the middle of that transition
Of wave
zone
2. Okay.
we are the first step into the second wave, I would say.
Okay.
Where
And
we're
so
gonna
what does
create
wave
consolidate.
3 look like? So let's stay on the technology side, and then we'll stay with consolidation, because I think we should go to the operator side eventually. But what's wave 3 look like from your vantage point?
Wave 3, a couple of things that I see coming, as you say, further consolidation, which we can get into. But one thing is, I was asked this question at a panel I did at WLF at Half Moon Bay. It was 2018, 2019.
I was there. I remember.
And that was the year that we had somebody from Lyft come in and talk about autonomous vehicles and how the entire Lyft and Uber fleets were going to be autonomous within a couple of years. Nobody was going to be driving by the mid-20s and everything else. And I was asked for my take on stage. Of
Your prognostication.
What does the future look like? And at the time I said, autonomous vehicles on public streets just wasn't in the cards. Too many variables, too difficult to manage, not going to happen. But that slow speed controlled environment was someplace that lent itself to that, and that parking lots were going to be one of the first places that saw AVs and were going to need to manage them. Having a gate arm where you needed to pull a ticket wasn't going to work when there wasn't a driver in the car to actually pull it. LPR, technologies like that, gateless, was going to be more and more of a thing as autonomous vehicles came into play. As you went to the shopping mall, stepped out of your car, pushed a button, and your car went parked itself. I was 100% wrong on both of those things, right? Waymo on the streets now in California, in Texas, and in Arizona, coming to the rest of the country, I think. Have you?
I have done
traveled?
one Waymo ride.
What'd you think?
It's mind-blowing, actually.
In what way?
There's nobody driving. Where's the driver?
But how did you?
It was
you know,
spectacular.
yes. Yeah.
It really was.
And I think there are a couple of great things about the service. One, there's no auction, right? So when you open the app and it says there's a car 5 minutes away from you, well, there's actually a car 5 minutes away from you. You don't have to. It's not going to bait and switch.
It
and
won't
tell
say
you
no.
The closest car.
Yeah.
It won't say no.
Yeah.
Exactly. So there's that. You get in the car, and there are cameras and there are microphones and everything else, but at least you feel like it's a private environment,
Yep.
and you can carry on a conversation with your fellow passengers without feeling like you're being overheard, which is a nice feeling.
Yeah.
Right now, anyway, the cars are very clean and well maintained. You're brand new.
Jags, I think.
Yeah,
For Waymo,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think they'll ever look like New York City taxis. I think when you've got a single
Hopefully.
company who's responsible for all of them, they've
Yeah.
got a brand image to maintain.
Yep.
So I think they'll stay looking decent. And honestly, it's once you get over that hurdle
Yeah.
of nobody behind the wheel, it's actually a calmer, easier driving experience, because they're not speeding, they're not cutting people off, they're not going through potholes. I felt safer in a Waymo than I do with probably 90% of New York City cab drivers.
For sure.
So I think there's a future in that. So far, we haven't seen anybody really take up the low speed parking lot challenge type thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's partly technology. You really need LiDAR to drive a car autonomously, and it's just too expensive to do on a personal vehicle at the
Right.
moment. And so right now, the only time I've seen a car parked autonomously is the Mercedes site in Germany.
Has
That's
anyone
on the
else seen an autonomous car park itself? Not yet.
I've seen it on
There you
video.
go.
I've never seen it in person.
Yeah. Okay. So you can be right about that.
I think it's coming. I think
Yeah.
it will happen, but I think there are other trends that are probably more important to cover. But so yeah, that's one thing that I don't see coming.
What do you see coming?
I think the biggest trend, is probably in congestion management, curb management, things like that. I think it's one of the big areas. You're seeing a lot of private operators now adopt technology. You've seen a lot adopt technology to improve profitability and efficiency and so forth.
Understanding who's coming and going.
Yes, but municipalities having less of a profit motive, or at least a delayed profit incentive, haven't been as quick to adopt a lot of the efficiency related technologies. I think that municipalities tend to be nobody needs it until everybody needs it kind of thing. That
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be first, nobody wants to be last. And I think we're approaching that transition point where people see the efficacy, see the value, and then everybody wants it, everybody needs it.
What's interesting is if Romy were sitting there, Romy and I did a podcast probably 6 months ago, 9 months ago. Was it a year ago? I'm looking at Courtney. And that was when he was with
Automotives. Yeah, I was just going to say, Romy has done a lot of work actually to advance the cause of.
Right. And he was really frustrated with regulation, with the laws and the regulations. And some of the curb regulations were literally 100 years old in these municipalities, and it was really hard to get that changed. And so that was one. And then the second thing, I interviewed, I am blanking on her, Catherine from Seattle, and she was talking about just the infrastructure. It was also really challenging for curb management.
Yes,
so
for
there's
sure.
still hurdles there as well.
There are definitely hurdles. Access to power and things like that on the street is a big deal. There are companies who are cracking that nut, who are solving that. The important thing is to figure it out on the front end rather than bidding on a contract and saying, we'll work on that once we've got it.
Yeah.
It needs to be built into the RFP, who's supplying power and so forth. And that's always been
all that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's stay with technology before we get to the private operators and the consolidation. And let's transition to, and I lost my thought, good heavens. So on the technology front, the future, curb management, and it's not going to come to me. All right.
But I got more to say.
You have more? Okay,
yeah,
go.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, maybe it'll come to me.
But I think that
the perils of live podcasting.
The need in the city is particularly great. You're seeing the two things that impact ease of travel in cities the most are cars circling, looking for parking spaces, and double parked commercial vehicles loading and unloading. Cities don't currently have any insight into who is using their streets, when, and for what purpose. So creating commercial loading zones, having access to the GPS information that fleets are already collecting, and being able to understand behavior so regulations can change, so behavior can be influenced, is a huge opportunity.
Yeah.
You don't have to expand roads. You don't have to install new infrastructure. You just have to modify behavior to make things move more smoothly. Having one truck parked in a travel lane cuts capacity
it gums
in
up
half,
everything.
or worse, because everybody's trying to merge, right?
Yeah.
Eliminating that sort of bottleneck is a game changer.
Yeah.
So you're seeing New York City with congestion management, which works. One of the things.
Yeah. So what happened in New York? Did I see it cut it by 30%? Traffic by 30%?
Cut traffic by 30%.
Yeah.
Initially, transient parking occupancy was down by about 20%. It's starting to creep back. It's back up. It's down 15% or so now. About 5% has come back.
Normalized.
But what they found when they instituted the congestion pricing in London was that after about 6 months, it was so much easier to drive to town that non-price sensitive drivers were more likely to drive than not. So parking garages actually filled up again, and they could charge more because the parkers
were not price sensitive.
Yeah. And but it also cut down on congestion because those price sensitive people weren't circling the block in the middle of the city trying to find cheap parking.
So it normalized.
So it was a win-win kind of thing. The parking companies were making more money. The streets were easier to navigate. So I think ultimately it's a question of how long it takes, but I think the New York City transient market will come back. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah. Okay. I know what I was going to ask. So like deal flow, on the technology side? What are you seeing on deal flow as far as the capabilities? Obviously, you're keyed in on smart cities and curb management. Is there any other? Are there any other deals that you're seeing that are interesting from a technology perspective?
There are a lot of, as I say, this really translates into that consolidation space. We've seen some consolidators come in trying to collect payments companies. We've seen a lot of smaller tech companies getting to a point now where they're reaching a decision point, right? Can we grow? Is there enough? Do we have the runway we need to hit profitability and create a return for our investors, or are we stuck?
Yeah.
And I think there are more and more companies that are in that stuck mode that haven't been able to bridge the gap.
Yeah.
And I think there's an inflection point there that's going to lead to a lot of transactions. And that's across technology sectors. As I say, there's been a ton of innovation, and we've hit that stage where there's going to be some weeding out. I think. Not that there aren't great ideas in there, but it's just not everyone is going to be adopted.
Yeah. Okay.
Like the end users, there just aren't there. There's not a big enough market for everybody.
And it's hard to get to them. The sales and marketing model is hard.
This is a small industry with a limited number of buyers, and it's relationship driven a lot of the time. It's not
always,
easy. It's not easy.
It's always relationship driven. At least that's been my experience.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Okay. So now we are fortunate that we're going to have you in May at our user conference, Fusion 25. And one of the big topics, because we'll have a good mix of universities and private operators in the audience, and in fact, a couple of them that have already gone through the consolidation stage. So I know that you can see things happening from that perspective. Tell us as much as you can without giving away trade secrets around what from a private operator or from an operations perspective, consolidation.
On the operator side or the technology side?
Yeah, on the operator side. I
okay.
transitioned on you. I'm sorry.
So I think there's been a lot of consolidation on the operator side already.
Yep.
There are, as we know, a handful of companies in the industry who have deep pockets behind them, private equity backing.
They just made a big move.
Icon being one, obviously Metropolis being another.
Yeah, really big.
Town Park, PMC. You've got a lot of businesses in the industry now that have the wherewithal to go out and make acquisitions. There are still a lot of the, call them mom and pops, the smaller family-owned businesses that are single city, couple dozen locations. And I think there's opportunity. There are folks that are they're not implementing technology on that scale isn't efficient in a lot of cases. So a lot of it's still manual. There are great opportunities to fold those into a larger organization, create those efficiencies. And so I think there'll be a lot of that, the smaller transactions.
Yeah.
And I've seen there are a company or two out there doing it now where they have an in-house proprietary technology. And there's a two-step process. Hey, use our technology. We'll license it to you with an understanding that a couple years down the road, we can help you. We're going to help you earn more money in the interim with the expectation that, a few years down the road, there'll be a second transaction where maybe we merge these things together and you get some money to take home.
Is that a premium all-pro story?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a premium story anyway. All-pro is one example, but they've done it across the Southeast.
Okay, so
Southwest.
Why now? What are I can think of a couple of reasons, I think. Why now? Why is the consolidation happening so much more rapidly? You talked about technology and the difficulty in adopting technology. Are there other forces at play?
A lot of it is generational transfer.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of called baby boomers who've been through a pandemic, have now stabilized the business, and it's time to move on to other things.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely kind of this generational transfer and it's a not uncommon story that families, a patriarch or a matriarch in a business owning an asset like that will say, I don't want my kids going into this business. I would like them to go and do something bigger and better. I want them to work on Wall Street. I want them to be a lawyer. I want them to be a surgeon, whatever it is, and not be a parking lot operator.
Guy. Yeah.
So I think there's some of that too. There are fewer kids wanting to get into the business, for better or worse, and no sort of value judgment on either side there. But so I think that's leading some of it. It's a generational transfer. And as I say, a lot of it is around just the ability to create efficiencies at scale and the opportunity to sell. There are half a dozen to a dozen active buyers out there aggressively looking for assets. And you've seen some big prices paid for operators over the last year. Metropolis being a good
Right.
example.
Yeah, it's a great, and a
But
very
others
public
as well.
example.
There's Peak went
Yeah.
for big prices.
The Australian company.
Yeah, smart parking.
Smart parking.
There have been
Yeah.
some nice
Been some
transactions.
good exits.
Some good exits. So I think that'll act as a catalyst for a lot of it as well.
I always marvel at the fact that you can find a city and find the family that started parking, and they're coincidentally 100 years old. The Zaritsky's.
Yeah.
We just talked to Rob and the Jones family in San Diego, the Poyers in St. Louis. It's amazing.
Yeah, the Harwoods in New York.
The Harwoods, yeah,
They
of
started
course.
by
Yeah, what a
buying
great story.
by buying horse stables.
Yeah.
Converting them to parking garages.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay. So last question before we get to the lightning round here, and then we'll throw some questions out to the audience.
Okay.
An opportunity to ask questions. What other trends are going to impact parking from your perspective? What's going to come from the outside in?
Let's see. First off, everybody talks about the demise of parking and how parking is going away and we don't need as many parking places as we have, spaces as we have. I'm not sure that's true. If you look at the St. Louis Fed collects data around vehicle miles traveled, vehicles registered across the United States, there is a consistent trend up. COVID screwed with every data set in the world, but you can see that levels now are above where they were in 1819. There's an upward sloping curve for both of those statistics. And there's almost no, unless you're going to the drive-through and then going straight home again, almost no trip doesn't have a parking event in the middle of it. So, parking sessions by definition are also growing.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's increasing demand. On top of that, gas prices are stable. And if anything, given global situations, are likely to stay where they are or drop. And for better or worse, public transportation is not really getting any better. So I think demand is going to continue to grow, which bodes well for the industry. I think there's a lot of opportunity in that growth. The other piece is obviously the electric vehicles. Certainly a lot of talk out of Washington about slowing that trend, but I don't think you're going to stop that trend. I think we're far enough down the curve that the OEMs are pretty committed to it. And at the state level, there's also a fairly strong commitment. You're already seeing a lot of new trends adopted. States actually implementing charges on EVs for particular taxes on EVs because they're not paying a gas tax and they're using a road. So there's a recognition of a need for a new paradigm in terms of road taxes.
Yep. I just saw a headline. I didn't read the article, but I saw a headline that there are more charging stations than gas stations in the state of California now. Did anybody else see that? Which is crazy.
Is that ports or locations? I wonder about
I don't know. So I didn't get into the headline. I didn't get beyond the headline, but I thought at least from a soundbite it was.
It sounds like a great soundbite.
Could have been clickbait.
I would scratch my head a little bit on that one, honestly.
Could have been clickbait. I might have been a sucker for it. I didn't get into it.
But that's the one thing around EVs and charging. I think the DC fast charge locations, highway, you're going to need some of that, right? But vehicles are stationary for 95% of their lives. A lot of that is at home. So anybody with a home charger is primarily going to charge there unless they're taking trips of more than 200 miles.
Yeah,
which is unusual.
It is.
And the other place that vehicles spend a lot of time stationary is at the office, at hotels, and at shopping venues and things like that. Right.
Yeah.
So I expect that a lot of the charging infrastructure is going to be level 2, long-term 8-hour full charge type timeline, because people are going to be topping up. And it's going to be a convenience feature. It's going to be an amenity rather than a profit center for your average parking garage. That said, it's going to be necessary. By 2030, probably 25% of the U.S. fleet is going to be electric, or at least a plug-in hybrid.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. This trend toward plug-in hybrids is going to minimize the need for DC fast charging because that's expensive. And when you're a price-sensitive shopper and you have the option of paying for electrons or paying for gasoline, and you're paying
flow to this,
50 cents a kilowatt hour, or which is more or less equivalent to a gasoline price, you're going to go for the convenience of gas. Yeah. So I think that model of charging a premium for electrons is limited in its
transient.
It's transient.
Yeah.
Limited in its longevity. Yeah.
Okay. So really quickly, I'm thrilled, and probably the audience is thrilled, that you didn't start with AI. as the big mega trend.
Yeah.
So just a soundbite on your perspective on AI?
I'm not sure what it means yet from the
Yeah.
parking. It's being thrown at everything. A lot of the AI stuff in parking is simple machine learning.
Yeah.
It's big data analytics, and that a term that's been around for the last decade with a new label thrown on it. I think there are particular examples. I know Parker is looking at building a chatbot tool for customer service interactions. That is a valid AI application. I think like true AI applications in parking are limited. As I say, a lot of it's more around big data analytics and
Crunching the numbers.
yeah.
Yeah.
And still a big challenge for that in parking is clean data. You have how many different operating systems out there, how many different park systems, how many different software platforms, how many different payment systems. You're trying to collect all of data from all of those sources, standardize it so you can analyze it. That right now, I think, is the big challenge to BI adoption.
Yeah.
And whether you want to call that AI or BI or
AI.
I think it's one of the big challenges that's being worked on now. And one of the reasons why consolidation is so important, to minimize that variability in
the number of
in
players.
input.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
All right, that might put a fine point on it because the consolidation. In fact, there was just a session just before I was in with Bob Murray from Ohio State and James Payton from our shop. And Bob was really clear that he's trying to merge 5 different data sets in order to get a clear picture. In the end, it's BI. I use Power BI, and that doesn't sound very AI. It sounds BI. All right, I'm glad to hear that it's not quite ready for prime time, maybe in a couple of years. All right, let's transition because, as usual, poor Courtney, I run long, and then she's got to do her best to chop it up so that everybody doesn't have to listen to an hour and a half long podcast, although it could happen. So let's go lightning round where you don't have to give me really fast answers, but these are the 6 questions that I ask everyone. And hopefully I gave it to you ahead of time. I'm embarrassed the number of times I've stumped people. It's obviously just me that has phrases that I'm known for. Okay. So do you have a phrase that you're known for?
My wife tells me I overuse the word terrific. and it used to be a thing when I was working in Italy because it's really close to terrifying and terrible in Italian.
Okay.
So that was an issue. But other than that, I don't think what I'd really is like a theme song and a laugh track. I think that would help my general presence. but I don't necessarily have a catchphrase.
Okay. Terrific. So if I hear terrific in the office, then I'll know that they're just emulating you.
There you go.
All right. Second question is, what's the hardest thing you've ever done in your life? Not parking, that's next, but in your life.
For my 50th birthday, I ran the Grand Canyon rim to rim. So started at the South Rim, ran to the North Rim, and so 47 miles, 20,000 feet of elevation change. Started at 3:30 in the morning and ended about 9 o'clock at night. Did the first 3 hours down by the light of the full moon without any headlamp or artificial illumination, which was probably the most amazing experience of my life. So yeah, that was.
Did you cheat death in those 16 hours?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
The nice thing about running that first stretch in the dark is that the trail drops off really steeply on either side, but you can't see it in the dark.
If you just stay on the trail, you're good. And you obviously weren't alone.
I was alone.
Oh, you were alone?
Yes. Yeah. I say that. In the dark, I could see a headlamp a mile behind me and another one maybe a mile up.
Okay, so there were others doing
others,
it, but not necessarily
around,
with you.
But nobody with me.
Wow.
I did it independently.
Okay.
That was the first 3 quarters. And then my wife actually hiked down.
Okay.
And met me at Phantom Ranch at the bottom, and we did the last exit up to the top together.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Congratulations. That sounds like a lot of work. That sounds hard.
A lot of prep went into it.
All right. What's the hardest thing? You don't really have a parking job, but you're in parking. So what's the hardest thing of your parking experience or parking work?
Patience. I would love to see the pace of change accelerate.
Yeah.
And one of the hardest things, and I have been involved in raising capital for a lot of early stage companies. I have invested in a number of early stage companies, and I would love to see them all succeed faster. I would love to see both operators and municipalities and users, consumers for that matter, be more open to using new technologies.
Faster change.
Yeah, faster change.
I would too, by the way. I'd see it faster. But
that's the hardest part.
As they say, that is a hard thing. As they say, overnight success usually takes about 15 years.
That's right.
And so if we could squeeze it to 7.5, that'd be great.
Agreed.
Okay, if you could wave your magic wand, is that what you would fix, or is there something else in parking? If you could wave your magic wand, you would fix.
What could we fix in parking?
Certainly, regulation in cities.
Yeah, but standardization. If we could get everybody to work on the same platform, again, I think it would accelerate adoption, because the biggest challenge in all of this is consumer education, right?
Yeah.
And when a consumer has to learn a new system every time they go to a different parking lot, they get frustrated. It slows down adoption. So if there were, it doesn't work because everybody's trying to compete on their own. But if there were a standard user interface across the entire industry, I think it would simplify everybody's job. The open mobility standards on the mobility side has been a great accelerator. If there were the similar thing on the parking operator side, I think that would be it.
That's a great answer, by the way. We haven't gotten that answer before, but I like it a lot. You're right. It would streamline things a lot. That is a big source of confusion.
Yeah.
These people see that machine one time, and it's not that easy to figure out. All right, coming around the bend here. When you're not parking cars, what do you do for fun?
I spend a lot of time on the water.
Okay.
I live at the beach. So I'm a fly fisherman. I'm a surfer. I'm a sailor. Probably in those three,
Yeah.
in that order.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
And then last thing, you can say your family,
Okay.
but I'll ask you for a second answer, because most good people say their family they're most proud of. But what are you most proud of?
Yeah, as you say, but honestly, I got to give my wife most credit for my family anyway, so I'm not sure I can really take credit.
I think you probably can, but you're right. Like my wife, she gets the lion's share of the credit for sure.
But most proud of, I think, within the parking industry or within it's hard to, there's several companies that I've worked with and helped get moving that I'm really pleased with their progress and their development.
Yeah.
Parking Base is one of them. Yeah. I've worked with those guys since their first capital raise, and I love what they're doing. I think they're really developing a nice standard. But yeah, I think most proud of some of the companies that I've helped raise capital for and watch them develop. Not that I can take much credit there. It's like a similar,
Sure,
I was there
of
at the seed round, but then the rest of it is.
I'm having this conversation with my board right now about how it takes different people at different stages to make a company go. Somebody who runs a $20 million company is usually not the same person that gets a company going from zero. It just takes different chops. It just takes a different disposition. And you got to value all of the pieces along the way, because without those early pieces, there would be no success.
Agreed.
So your input obviously made them go. So I love that. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. Any questions for Andy? Any burning questions?
Did we cover it all?
We literally covered it all. All right. Casey's got one in the back too. That's great.
Andy, what do you think about the trend on demand pricing, and like where does that end up? My concern is that all of a sudden government's going to get involved in telling us based on a supply and demand curve whether what we can charge or what we need to have from a signage perspective. When people scan now, it tells them how much it is. Now it could be there's an event or something else where we're able to drive more value for our customers. So where do you think that comes down at?
I think the idea of dynamic pricing and the way you make it broadly acceptable is the fact that you're managing supply and demand, right? You're increasing price to modify demand so you don't get more cars than you can park, right? In order for that equation to work, people need to know the pricing before they leave home, right? So the whole idea of being able to raising prices by the minute or by the hour over the course of a day, unless that's a posted price, that's early bird specials being a great example. If you come in at this hour, you're going to pay this. If you come in later in the day, you're going to pay that. That predictable dynamic pricing or posted dynamic pricing, I think works. If you get into a situation where you're changing prices without warning, without consumer information, then you get into the risk of being accused of price gouging and that sort of thing. Because at that point, you're not modifying behavior, you're increasing revenue, increasing profitability here. So I think the key is around how quickly can you change prices and how you signal those price changes to the consumer. I think that's the key to effective demand.
Transparency around.
Yes.
Because dynamic pricing isn't a different phenomenon.
No,
I know that if
yeah.
I book a trip tomorrow, there's a good chance that I'm going to pay a different price. And it's all based on supply and demand. I think part of it all goes back to they don't want to pay for parking in the first place. And then the fact that they have to pay more just makes them angrier.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's paying $155 and $255. Casey, wait, Casey.
Okay. Hi, I'm Casey. Hey, Casey, nice to meet you. Would you like to talk
Casey,
with me?
were
Next
you
one?
okay? All right.
No, I just wanted to add to that. Yeah, and so if we look at the hotel model, right? The sign on the back of my door says this room could be $650.
Right.
I'm not paying $650. We hardly ever pay $650. So looking at that high end, but high end, so you're not actually still deterring people from coming. Because no one's going to be upset when they're like, I thought it was $16 and it's only $8 to park. So just looking at other industries and what they do as a guide can help.
Interesting. Yeah, good.
I agree. The airline industry.
So use the mic just so that the recording picks it up. Otherwise, we won't be able to hear you. I'll have to repeat your
All
question.
right, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
All right.
perfect.
Yeah, the airline industry is a good example of that. They're using those pricing models, and they have been for years, and nobody's stopping them. I don't see why you couldn't technically do it in parking. I actually have two questions. Question number one, we talked about expediting things, making things go faster, and I agree. I don't know, this is me nerding out, but Ezra Klein has a book out right now about abundance and talking about in the US, like making things happen faster and why you can't get high-speed rail faster, why it's taking 20 years to do things. And I think in parking, we have a very similar issue, one of which would be the RFP process. And Christian, we talked about this at some point, but is there a way to fix this problem and make things because we're ready to give the technology, we're ready to share in the experience of the technology with other providers, our competitors, even for cities, universities, even private operators, so to speak. Is there a way to expedite this and to fight this battle, right? Do we need these things anymore?
There are a couple of programs, and the names are escaping me right now. And I'm sure somebody can help.
Somebody can help us for sure.
It starts with an S.
Yeah.
Where
the buying.
the
collective,
buying-
yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah,
the buying collectives. I think that's the ability to work around the RFP process is typically getting yourself on one of those buying collective lists. They can be very effective. I've worked with a couple of companies bidding into the municipal space who've been able to cut average lead times from 18 months to 6 or less. So I think those programs can be really effective. But yeah, I think a lot of it is, you've seen it, just about every city now has a honk, a pay by phone, a park mobile, a means of paying electronically. But a lot of them still don't have a central ERP system where they can visualize all of their parking data at once. So there's going to be a transition time where all of a sudden everybody needs to have that the same way there was with the payments side. And I think we're almost at that inflection point. I would say the next 12 to 18 months is going to see the tipping point where all of a sudden everybody needs to have a dashboard. And I think that will then drive further change as everybody realizes, this is what's been going on in my city that I was blind to. We got to address that.
Yeah.
So
Collecting data.
I think patience again is going to be key for just a little bit longer.
One other question. This is more of a self-fulfilling. What are your thoughts on, we have all this consolidation happening. We have operators becoming technology companies. A company like Honk, we eat, sleep, and breathe our technology. This is what we do every single day. We try and make it better for operators. We try and create an environment where parkers have a good experience, operators have a good experience. And a lot of operators are getting into the technology space. And we have a lot of nuance to our product that I think a lot of these operators aren't thinking about on some level. And I get why they're doing it. But what are your thoughts on this battle between the tech companies and now where we're seeing that operators are moving into the space?
I think there are two paradigms on the operator tech thing. There's the sort of the metropolis model where you have a tech company moving into the operator space. And then you have which is a model, and I'm not sure I see the value creation in the long run. If you're valued as a tech company and you take on operations, I'm not sure how you keep the pure play valuation. But on the other side of the coin, you have operators who are deciding to build their own tech. And that's a hard one for me. Like, building tech is expensive up front, but far more important is maintaining tech.
Yeah.
Building is the easy part. Then you've got to integrate with every parks operator that your system touches. You've got all the different payment platforms, maintaining all of those APIs, maintaining interaction with everybody else as everybody else's system is changing is a full-time job. So for a park operator, you get quotes from software builders all the time. Say, I can build you a scan to pay product for $250,000. You know, $2 million later, you realize that it's going to cost you $500,000 a year just to maintain it. It's the costs that go into these things are, yes, that's one area where AI is reducing costs, is in software development and everything else. But it's still expensive. It's still challenging. And I would argue that if you build your own, then you're stuck with a more rigid system, right? Your ability to change is lower, because if you want to add a feature or modify an existing feature and invest the dev hours in doing that, you only have one customer for that product to defray that cost over. Whereas if you are a software provider, if you get a request from one customer, you can make that change and then roll it out to everybody else and charge more money for it. You know?
What about are the private equity firms? Does this add value? Where are their heads at when they see an operator that has the technology of some version of technology, or is it a value add?
What I advise operators when they come to me and ask me this question is, what are the odds of your ultimate buyer having the same technology that you do if you built yours yourself? They will have to change systems if they buy you. They'll have to move you onto their platform because they're certainly not going to adopt yours. And does that add or detract value for a buyer at the end?
Yep. What a great answer. Go ahead. Yeah. You got to get the mic. We have to be able to hear you.
Yeah. We talked a lot about consolidation, and just echoing Casey's comments. When you were asked about the magic wand, the answer was standardization. So when we're talking about consolidation, and parking is so dynamic in so many ways, not about pricing, operators, small businesses, venture capitalists, we've got all of this stuff going on. I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you see that standardization working alongside of this consolidation. So for me, when I hear standardization, it's one rule for everybody. Everybody is doing that rule. What does that look like for you, understanding that this is such a dynamic industry?
As I say, it was a magic wand request. I think it's close to an impossibility. I think because look, a lot of the differentiation.
What would it look like?
In a perfect world, a lot of the standardization would be on the user interface. As I say, the biggest challenge right now to technology rollout is consumer education. If there were something that everyone could use and they were familiar with it and it was repeatable, I think that would go a long way towards simplifying everybody's job. Look, one of the big pieces of the software industry, though, is making sure that your product is differentiated. You've got a new bell or whistle, right? Convincing technology developers to adopt a standard user interface is going to be a tough sell. I get that. But I think it would go a long way. I think there's room for a lot of variability on the back end, and that BI layer, I think, is right now one of the more important areas of potential change for operators, giving them better information to drive their systems. And I think that's a great place for differentiation among technology players. But I see consolidation almost by definition leads to standardization simply because there are fewer alternatives. So I think that's a step in the right direction. And the other thing I'm seeing, you guys announced the other day an integration with Parking Base, right? So I'm seeing more of the software companies creating collaborative relationships. And I think that will help drive that in the right direction as well.
Yeah, just as a follow-up, and this isn't a question, but I've seen that with in-car navigation systems, and we saw that way before the pandemic. We saw some consolidations there. Do you think the parking industry is leveraging payment applications like Google, like Apple Pay, to integrate from a payment system perspective to standardize the way people interact with their cell phones, with the pay on foots, with the QR codes?
I haven't. There hasn't really been enough of that. I think Google is never going to want to manage rate cards, right? The rates and rules are always going to be the opportunity for the parking technology side. The payments element of it, I agree. I'm not sure why you need a separate wallet to pay for parking as opposed to any other transaction that you might cover during the day.
What can we do as an industry to help that along?
Boy, That might be above my pay grade.
Mine too.
Yeah, consolidation is the right.
Let's try again. It's dead. Yeah. So we have a really strong belief that we're going to do everything we can to obscure the complexity of the interaction for the customer behind the scenes. Now, that's very aspirational, but if I can talk to Parking Base and get the information that I need to put it in the fingertips of the hands of the person who's trying to help the person through the exception, that's the way to do it. Because otherwise, we're guessing because we don't have all the information, and it's locked in a system that isn't helpful because they don't have the support.
And you use that word exception, which I
Yeah.
think is key. It's like the volume of transactions in parking requires that essentially you manage by exception.
Yeah.
So it's that transaction that stands out from all the others as being different is the one that you have to focus on and identify workflows that allow you to pick those up quickly and address them.
Yeah.
And that's your business basically. But it's the key again to that seamless user experience. And
That last 3% is important in the end.
where all of your incremental costs are.
Yeah.
And it's where all of your frustrated, where the parking
it's-
industry reputation comes from.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
You're on the
Did you have
pointy
a
end.
question, Sean? Okay.
He was just stretching.
James?
Thanks, Andy. You've touched on this and hinted on it a little bit, but I'm curious if you could expand more on like your investment thesis, or like where in the industry do you want to zig when everyone else is zagging? What's undervalued, what's overvalued, those kinds of things.
Investment thesis is an interesting. I think the key is finding a problem that's big enough. I think, not to pick favorites, but for example, there was the panel here yesterday, and there was one that wasn't the panel, it was the pitch competition here. And there was only one idea that I saw in there that had applicability beyond the parking industry. There's so much technology in the parking industry already, as I mentioned. It's an easy problem to identify. It's a harder problem to solve, but there are a lot of people coming at it. So finding a big enough TAM is a good start. And then from there, honestly, a lot of it at the earlier stages, at that seed level, is really around management team. Are these the guys who have the experience, the enthusiasm, and the endurance to get this thing far enough down the line to make it go? It isn't just having the right idea, it's having the ability to implement the idea, I think, is, if anything, more important.
And pivot.
Yeah.
And change and
it's
figure it out.
It's the flexibility, but it's also, there are lots of engineers who don't have great HR skills, for example. And as you build a business, you've got to cover all of it. If you want scalability is, I guess, if you wanted to boil it all down to one word, that's from a product solution, from a company infrastructure solution. I think and from a technology perspective, you've got to be scalable on all those levels for success. Right?
You've hit the wolf rule. See, I have a million phrases.
The wolf rule. Okay.
The
I
wolf
like that.
rule. I
need
so
more phrases.
so when I do small I investing, right? Small checks, but I'm trying to write seed capital. You run into engineers who have no sales skills, right? And so we talk about the fact that you've got to have a sales leader, you have to have a product leader, you have to have somebody in support, customer success that's going to catch all the questions and the problems and feed it back to engineering. And then the most important thing, you have to have somebody who can create an invoice and collect cash. Because until you can create an invoice and collect cash, you do not have a business. And so I tell these founders all the time, it can be two people that wear four hats at first. But at some point, you have to get people that cover all of those things, or one of them's going to fail. And any one of those four pillars is fatal to a small company.
Agreed. Yeah.
And I've dinged many companies who had either two. It goes both ways. There were friends that were salespeople, and so there were three friends that were all salespeople, no product people, or there were three engineers that were all product people, and none of them could sell. or they weren't natural salespeople, and some of them were quite good, but those are the kinds of things that ultimately end up fatal, which is back to your point about management team.
Agreed. Yep.
So
That's a great
all right,
point.
I'll get off my soapbox.
That was said.
Any other questions? We are officially way long. We're into
Really?
the break. So thank
Oh,
you.
okay.
Andy, thank you again.
Oh, this was great.
I
Thank you for having
appreciate
me.
that.
Yes.
I thought it was a great session. Thank you all for being here and for participating. It means a lot to me. Thank you. Buy a drink later.
That's a wrap on this episode of Harder Than It Looks, Parking Uncovered, presented by Parker Technology. Please leave us a review if you liked what you heard. Make sure you tune in next month as we continue to uncover tips, tricks, and best practices to manage what we all know is harder than it looks, parking a car. Bye for now.